Hi everyone. I'm so sorry. I'm working from a hotel in the US and the internet just died. Um just as I was trying to start this webinar. I'm so sorry about that. So yeah, technical difficulties on my side. Thank you for your patience. I am now hotspotting the internet from my phone. So let's hope that the hotspot won't fail me like the Hyatt's Wi-Fi connection just has. Um, the Wi-Fi in my hotel room was working just fine all morning, uh, and just fine when I did the practice. But of course, just on the hour, as I expected everyone to dial in, it died. And I could not find a way in the last 2 minutes of panic and scrambling to reconnect to the hotel Wi-Fi I've been using the last 2 days. So here we go. Let's hope my Vodafone roaming data from the UK while I'm here in America will work okay. Thank you so much. We had over 100 people sign up. We have around 50 people live. I'm going to jump straight into the slides for the webinar. And yeah, thank you all so much. The Q&A function is still live. So if you do have questions to resubmit that I haven't covered, let me know. But yeah, today I really just want to talk to you about the daily habits of inclusive leaders. So these are the things that I encourage all of my clients to do. These are the things that I try to hold myself accountable to as well. But I just want to be honest with you. This is very much an ideal scenario of habits. And these are things that I myself still struggle with. But they're the things I try to hold myself accountable to in my day-to-day. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Hustle Crew, a little bit about check-in. I'm going to go through that super quickly because of the technical difficulties that I encountered earlier. I'm going to try and de-stress myself as well, because that was a bit tense. I was texting my husband and he was like, I can't do anything from London. You realize that? And I was like, I know. Anywho, then I'm going to start actually with unhelpful daily habits, because in my own growth as a leader, I've actually found it really helpful to focus on the habits that make people feel unsafe around me. So these are things that I've received through feedback. These are things that I've learned through people coming, into the DMs of the Hustle Crew pages and letting us know what their managers are doing or what their founders are doing to make them feel excluded as one of the underrepresented teammates. And I think it's almost as important for us to avoid doing these things, these unhelpful habits, as it is to do the helpful habits. So I'm going to start with those. And just quickly to share some of the themes from the questions you've all submitted. A lot of really similar challenges faced by the audience that are here today. We have people who are executive leaders. We have people who are managers. We have people in big tech enterprises, as well as very early stage startups. We have people from public sector on this call, but all of you are dealing with similar things. So a lot of you want things you can start doing right away. And I was really encouraged to see that request come from a lot of the men who signed up, a lot of the more senior men. They're like, I know there's actions for me to take. I just want to know what they are so I can start doing them. So well done to you. A lot of people want to know how they can challenge their leaders who don't realize they're doing things that make their team feel unsafe. So we're going to touch on that. A lot of people also want to know, how do we deal with teams that have different expectations of what inclusion is? How do we deal with inclusion in a hybrid environment and ensure junior people feel comfortable to speak up? How do we help managers who, we're in the UK, it's a mostly white country, they've never managed people who are brown or black before? How do we support them? How do we manage dominant personalities, strong personalities who are very opinionated about inclusion? Maybe they don't want to hear about inclusion. And then also, how do we get leadership on board, especially when we have a metrics-driven environment and we're not measuring inclusion just yet? So a lot of themes, and I hope that these habits will show you ways to make progress across those different challenges. If you're new to Hustle Crew, you've never been to one of our webinars before, you've never been to one of our workshops before, I started this careers community in 2016 after working in a startup where I didn't feel safe and I didn't feel included. And I felt this real need to bring people together to have brave conversations about how we can make this sector more inclusive, and really all workplaces. And I'm really proud that over the last 6-7 years, we've been able to work with NHS, Amazon, Sky, you name it, helping teams have difficult but important conversations about what it will take to make everyone thrive at work. I always share community guidelines at the start because I would encourage you to do this too whenever you want to have a conversation about things that can get emotional, things that can feel triggering, things about class, race, bias, prejudice. Just remind people that it is a safe and brave space, and whatever they share will be kept in confidence there. And also remind people that no one's perfect. Okay, I know I'm showing up as the expert here. I've done hundreds of workshops. I too am still learning. Humans are inherently complex. Our needs are complex. We're not very good at expressing them. So as we try to adapt to all the different needs of our people around us every day, we don't always get it right. And then the final challenge I have for you before jumping into the habits is get out your comfort zone. Most of us still want to stay in our comfort zone. We want to be a good ally. We want to be an inclusive leader, but we want to do it in a way where we never feel uncomfortable. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. If you are serious about taking action immediately after this training to make sure your team see you as someone who cares about inclusion, you're going to have to be a little awkward. You're going to have to say things you're not sure how they'll land. You're going to have to experiment with new vocabulary. You're going to have to experiment with vulnerability, admitting that you don't have all the answers, you don't know what to do all the time, but it's worth it anyway. So yeah, I want to challenge you as I speak today to really get out your comfort zone and into your learning zone and think, wow, okay, that's really interesting what Abadesi said. So what does that look like for me? How will I act differently, or what will I say differently? So the first thing I want to start with is making assumptions. The more senior you are in your career, the more assumptions you make. And I'm speaking as someone who's been an entrepreneur for almost a decade, and I've been in the tech industry for over 10 years. I first became a manager at 24 and I'm 36 now. So, I've had a long, long stint of managing people. And I think it's really important for you to remember that making an assumption in a way is a time-saving action, right? If someone comes up to you and they're like, listen, we need to talk about X, you go, oh, X, I know what they're going to say about X. I've already spoken about X with that person today and that person today and that person today. I know where this is going. But do you know where it's going? If you've suddenly invented the magical skill of reading minds or seeing into the future, DM me after this webinar. I've got some lottery numbers to get off of you. But in all seriousness, none of us really know what is in someone else's mind. We don't. So if someone on our team, especially someone with less power and less authority than us, comes to us in trust, in confidence, and says, hey, listen, I need to talk to you about our flexible working. I need to talk to you about our team away day. I need to talk to you about our performance review cycle. And you go, gosh, I just don't want to hear this. Like, the process is finished. We're not changing it. Or we've made a decision about where we're going. I don't want to hear complaints. You're sending a message that you just don't have time for them. And that is what makes you unapproachable. So for people who are saying things like, how do we get more junior employees to speak up? How do we get people who aren't engaged to be engaged? Don't make assumptions about what they want, and give them that space to express their views and share their stories and share their feelings. Don't assume what your team want, and don't assume what will make every person feel safe. What will make one young Muslim woman in a hijab in your company feel safe and included isn't the same for the other young woman in a hijab in your company. Kimberly Crenshaw invented the metaphor of intersectionality, not just to remind us that we can have overlapping experiences of discrimination. She also invented the phrase of intersectionality to remind us that no group of people share identical thoughts and identical desires and identical feelings. Just because I show up as a Black woman doesn't mean I can speak on behalf of all Black women. So making assumptions, which I do all the time just to save time, our brains love shortcuts, is really, really, really unhelpful. So don't do that. Never assume. There's a radio station my husband always listens to, NTS, but NTS, their motto is don't assume. And I like that. And I took it one level further in my team, where I said assumptions are dangerous, right? Because when someone on my team says, oh, I just thought you'd be happy with us to do X, Y, Z, I was like, that's dangerous. You can't assume how I feel. And in a similar way, you can't assume what someone's worried about, what someone's concerned about, what someone's anxious about. You cannot assume that. And if you care to know, you have to create space for them to share that with you. Please feel free to follow up in the chat or in the Q&A if you're struggling to apply that to something, in your day-to-day. But otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next unhelpful habit. So the next unhelpful habit is shutting down. And this is one that, oh my goodness, early in my career, I feel like I was always on the receiving end of, starting to voice a complaint, starting to voice an opinion, and a boss just cutting me off or interjecting like, okay, I know where you're going with this. And I just found that always so hurtful, if I'm honest, because, you start to observe things like some people are given the chance to speak up and challenge things, and other people are not given the chance to speak up and challenge things. So why do we spend hours debating which pub we're going to go to on Friday, but we can barely spend an hour talking about what we're going to do for Black History Month or what we're going to do for Women's History Month? So, again, the more senior you are, the more powerful you are, the more likely you are to be guilty of this thing, shutting people down, cutting people off, or mentally checking out. I'm guilty of this as well. Okay, so I'll be honest. I'm a time poor person, like all of you who have shown up here. Thank you so much for making time, by the way. Really appreciate it. But I know that when we are invited to participate in a conversation that doesn't feel interesting, doesn't feel relevant, doesn't feel urgent, we kind of check out a little bit, right? Like if someone's like, hi, okay, so I'm just going to start talking about our plans for Mental Health Awareness Day, it could be very easy for you to just kind of like start daydreaming in your mind, like, okay, what am I going to do for the presentation later? What am I going to have for lunch later? But the thing is, we communicate so much through our body language, through our eye contact or lack of eye contact, through whether or not we're leaning back or leaning in. And it's really important that when people bring up something, you show that you're engaged, even if it's a topic you don't know much about, even if it's a topic you have no experience in, even if it's a topic where, frankly, you are afraid of saying the wrong thing. Let's say, for example, everyone starts talking about mentioning pronouns on Slack or Teams or in email signatures. Now, in your mind, like me, maybe you're cisgender, you haven't been following the latest news and what trans rights and activists are saying, what's the right way to go about this. So you might think, oh gosh, I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I'm going to look so old, outdated. Let me just shut my mouth. A much better approach is to say, I'm really glad we're talking about this. I might not be saying much because I just don't know the best things to say here. Like, I'm happy for all of you to lead, but I want you to know that I am engaged and I am listening. And it could be as simple as that. You don't have to force yourself into the conversation if you don't necessarily know what you want to contribute, but you can make it explicitly clear, hey, I'm not checking out. I'm just going into listening mode because I'm happy for all of you to take the lead. Or you can even say, listen, this might be an ignorant suggestion because I don't know much about this, but how about we do X? How about we do Y? So it's really about you just making sure that you are showing up. I wanted to say another little thing about shutting down, because I notice this quite a lot in the workshops that I do. So I have an incredible team at Hustle Crew. We've got 15 consultants across the US, UK, and Europe. But I tend to do most of the CEO level workshops. So if we're dealing with exec teams and they really want to understand their privilege better, their biases better, and acknowledge the role that their identity plays in shaping their leadership, then I will usually lead those sessions. And I'll just stop sharing for a little bit to talk about that. What I notice often is once I mention sticky issues for, let's say, the average demographic of 50-something cisgender heterosexual white men, I might say, okay, now I'm going to talk about white privilege and male privilege in the context of patriarchy as a system of oppression and white supremacy as a system of oppression, where white is the dominant race. I can see them just shrink and lean back because, the mention of the word white supremacy, it's almost like I just put a KKK hood on and I was like, woohoo, let's go burn some crosses. I can sense that discomfort. And I suppose it comes from this unwillingness to engage in a sticky issue, or an unwillingness to associate oneself as a white person with that topic of conversation. But I think what I want to say to you is, if you're the kind of person that is, checking out as soon as these phrases are mentioned, for whatever reason it might be, maybe you're afraid of getting canceled, you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, you feel like you don't have anything to say, I'll tell you now that it makes you look like you don't care enough about the topic to participate in the conversation. So it's really important that you don't shrink back and lean back when people on your team say, hey, let's talk about racism. Let's talk about white supremacy in the workplace. Let's talk about the fact that we're still living in a male-dominated society because of patriarchy. It's really important that you do whatever work you need to do inside or outside of work to go through those complex emotions that you feel whenever these topics are brought up, so that the future time that those topics are brought up, you go, yeah, let's talk about it. And by the way, I might say the wrong thing, I might put my foot in my mouth, but this is a really important topic. Let's crack on. Because it's a million times better, in my opinion, to say, like, let's crack on, I'm engaged, let's create space for this conversation, than to just lean back and kind of say, I'm not going to be a part of this conversation, actually. No, you all can be a part of this conversation, and I'm just going to observe. Because again, it's about power. And those of us with the most power and authority, I am the CEO of my organization, I'm in charge of a team. Those of us with the most power and authority are also the most critical participants of the conversation, right? And the reason I say that is, if you look at studies from McKinsey, Lean In, Harvard Business Review, about how to promote inclusion in your team, all of the research will point towards leadership modeling behavior for everyone else. As a CEO of my company, I'm a role model. Everyone looks to me to decide, how should I act in this moment? What should I do in this moment? And if you are the kind of leader where when someone says, let's talk about racism, ableism, Islamophobia, the plight of working parents, whatever it might be, if you're the kind of person who, when these topics come up, check out, shut down, you're giving permission to everyone else to also check out and also shut down. But if what you want is for people to be engaged and feel safe to talk about these things and feel encouraged to talk about these things, then a much better behavior for you to role model is engagement. Lean in and say, yes, let's talk about it. Even if you don't feel like you have a lot to say, use your body language, use your voice to say, this is important, let's talk about it. So yeah, please challenge yourself to do that. And as I said at the beginning, that's where the discomfort comes from. Because people always say to me, Abadesi, how will I know I'm doing the right thing? How will I know I'm being more inclusive? If you're being uncomfortable, you are being more inclusive. And I'm speaking to the people who represent dominant groups. So if you are white, if you are, a cisgender, heterosexual man, if you are someone that has a lot of affinities with leadership, with your industry, you're going to be more uncomfortable because you're in the status quo, right? And the status quo is where we do nothing, we don't talk about anything, we don't change anything. You just keep riding the wave. Woo, nothing has to change. But when you have that energy of like, no, things do have to change, things do have to be more inclusive, people are changing, the generations are getting younger, they want these things, then you have to be uncomfortable because you have to be the person that says to your peers, look, guys, we've got to lean in on this. We can't lean back on this anymore. We can't check out anymore. And, linked to that is a lack of curiosity. I remember when BLM marches were happening in London in 2020, and all of us were thinking of going, all of my friends, and some of us had concerns about COVID and catching it and this, that, and the other. And, I said to my husband, when did you realize you were white? I wanted to check his curiosity about race. Race is something I've been thinking about since I was a kid. I grew up with a Filipino mom. I grew up with a Nigerian dad. I was always very aware of identity. And he said, honestly, I don't really think I thought about my whiteness or my race until now. And that was such a profound moment for me because it made me realize we're only really curious about the things that affect us. That's how we work. That's how we operate. And so, of course, a lot of white people aren't really curious about racism because they've never experienced it. In a similar way, men aren't necessarily curious about, I don't know, sexism and harassment because they've never experienced it. But just because it's not your lived experience doesn't mean you shouldn't be curious, especially if you're a leader, if you are a supervisor, manager, someone who people in the company are looking up to for guidance, for inspiration. You have to apply curiosity to the breadth and diversity of lived experiences in your team. And if you are more curious about the people who are like you, if I'm more curious about, ooh, Sophia, she's like me, she's interested in the same things as me, and we look similar and we have similar backgrounds, and I'm far more curious about her life than I am about Muhammad's life, because Muhammad is different to me and we don't share the same interests. People will interpret that as lack of inclusion, because they'll say, oh, well, she's only interested in the career development of the people like her, and she's not interested in the career development of me. What kind of leader is that? So when you're not curious, it's interpreted as, unfortunately, something that could be unsafe for others. Like, oh gosh, they don't even care about me. I don't feel safe around them. I don't want to open up about my needs or my experiences around them. So, if you're thinking about everyday actions to take forward, things you can encourage other people in your team to do, apply curiosity, especially apply curiosity, in those group environments, team meetings, all hands, and make sure that you are really curious about what people are going through, what cultural moments are happening for them in their communities. Oh, Notting Hill Carnival was on the weekend. Amazing. I didn't get a chance to go. How was it? What was it like? Instead of leading with, the racist Times headlines, I heard it was record levels of stabbings and guns and knives. Like, no, be curious. Don't make assumptions. Don't shut down the conversation or steer it one way. Just be curious. And then the final thing before I move on to the helpful habits, defensiveness. Defensiveness, my old friend. I wear defensiveness like the way little kids wear that blankie, that blankie that they can't leave home without, can't go on holiday without their little blankie or their little worn teddy. That is what defensiveness is to me. Defensiveness is a very, very comfy cloak that protects my ego. But it's not helpful. It's not helpful. I remember working with a coach, Carl Martin of PeerPod, last year and the year before, to help me and my team be more productive. And he would always call out my defensiveness. With a coach, they get feedback from your team, they bring it back to you, and he'd be like, oh, I think you can really try harder when, you're bringing news to the team. I think you could be a lot clearer. I think you could be a lot more focused. And I would come back with, no, but they need that detail. They need to understand. And he'd say, you're just being defensive right now. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Or I'd show up a minute late to a Zoom, and he'd say, you showed up 1 minute late to the Zoom, but you get upset when people on the team show up late. Don't you think that's not fair? You got to role model the behavior you want them to see. And I'd be like, oh, I was 1 minute late because someone rang the doorbell just as I came in. And he was like, oh, there's your defensiveness again. I'm being honest with you because I want you to know how I'm also growing. But yeah, I think it's really important for you to also acknowledge your defensiveness. Okay. Sometimes we see feedback and we go, I reject that feedback. No, that person's just disgruntled because of X reason, or they're just disgruntled because of Y. Maybe that's your defensiveness talking, And similarly, if someone's like, hey, listen, when you said that during the meeting, or when you used these words during the meeting, that made me feel a certain way. You just got to embrace it. Even if it hurts, even if it's hard for you to accept, even if that's not how those events played out in your mind, you still have to show the person who's willing to give you that gift of feedback, the person who's brave enough to speak to you. You've got to say to them, wow, okay, thanks for letting me know. Because if someone comes to you and says, hey, listen, this happened and I need to tell you about it, and you go, oh, well, there's a reason why that would have happened. I'm sure that, that was totally justified by so-and-so or this, that, and the other. You're telling the person that you don't want to hear them, and you don't want to hear their version of events. And that will make people feel excluded and unsafe. So, helpful habits. Let's start with this first one of compassionate listening. And I want you to think of how this looks different to other types of listening. So most of us listen every day. You're listening right now. I'm not doubting the fact that you know how to listen and receive information. But listening with compassion is when you are not jumping in to offer solutions, jumping in to ask follow-up questions, waiting for your opportunity to contribute, share your version of events. Listening with compassion is where, someone on your team might have experienced something with a client, with a teammate that made them feel unsafe, that made them feel excluded. they're coming to you with a story. Maybe something happened at a work event where they, didn't feel supported, or they even felt discriminated against. When you're listening with compassion, you might be, it might be the way if you were like a teacher listening to a student talk about things, you're going to be thinking about your body language. You're going to be really like nodding along, showing compassion. If they're concerned, you're going to like mirror that. Oh, okay, I'm really sorry to hear that. Tell me more. And you're going to believe them, right? You're not going to say, well, I was at that event too, and I don't remember him being rude. I don't remember seeing. You're just going to believe what they say. And I know it can be really challenging sometimes for us to listen in this way, especially if you're a leader, especially if you're working in a fast-paced, dynamic environment, or you're an early-stage startup. You don't have time to listen to long, detailed stories. You just want to jump into action mode. But we're here talking about culture, and we're here talking about the daily habits of inclusive leaders. And one of the daily habits of inclusive leaders is compassionate listening. It's right. I'm here. You have my undivided attention, and I'm listening to what you have to say. I'm not listening to offer solutions. I'm not listening to offer. I am listening so that you feel heard. I want you to feel seen and heard. And you go into the conversation with that mindset, with that attitude, whether it's virtual or in person, and you're just focused on what that person has to say. And whatever you need to do to stay focused on what they have to say, do it. Look in their eyes, repeat what they're saying in your head so you're staying on track. Try to not let yourself get distracted, and really just listen with compassion. The next thing you have to do is have empathy. And a lot of us are like, empathy, come on, like, this is so obvious. I know that. But the truth is, as we get older or as we get more senior, it does become challenging for us to empathize with the experience of people who have less power and authority than us in the business, people with less experience than us in the business. So it's really important for you to just think about, how can I really relate to the feelings of what's being shared here? And if it is a story of exclusion, you might have to go way back to the recesses of your mind and think about times where you felt left out at school. Maybe you were the last person to be picked in the team at PE, or maybe you are thinking of, when you first got to university and like how you struggled to find the right social group, whatever it might be. When people on your team are coming to you with challenges, if there's nothing in your current work experience that helps you relate, then just go back in time. Go back to other times in your life or other roles that you have in your life where you can find that common ground, and use that common ground to tap into the emotions that they're feeling, so that you can really, really start to empathize with them. And you don't need to be the same lived experience as someone to empathize with their experience. I'm not saying that I can of people with disabilities, or that I can fully understand the challenges of people who are neurodivergent, but I can think of times where I didn't know if I'd be able to, enjoy an experience as much as the people around me because of my lack of skills, my lack of resources. Or I can think of times where I just lacked the confidence or the support to engage in an activity at work. So I can still empathize to some degree. And I think it's really important for everyone to do that. Again, the more senior you are, the more experienced you are, the more important that is for you, because you're short on time, you're probably not really engaged in the conversation. But showing someone that even if they're junior, even if they're a different background, that you can really empathize with what they're going through is really important, even if it means just going back to an earlier memory. Okay, so we talked about a lack of curiosity, but now I just wanted to talk a bit about curiosity specifically, because a lot of us are still leaning on outdated stereotypes, or mainstream media narratives to make judgments about people on our team. Oh, Gen Z people are like X. People in their 20s are like Y. People that want to work from home all the time are this, that, and the other. No. You just don't know that. Okay, fine. There might be some general trends that you make decisions on, but again, in the realm of making people feel included and making people feel safe, it's really important that every time you're interacting with people on your team, you remain curious to the speaker's experience, and you remain curious to the stories being shared by that speaker. So, stereotypes about students, stereotypes about Gen Z, stereotypes about, women going on maternity leave, stereotypes about mothers coming back from maternity leave. If you read the press, it's horrible, the amount of parental bias that exists, the amount of bias that exists across so many different groups still in 2023. But I think when we apply curiosity, we can actually challenge a lot of our implicit biases, because we say, okay, you are showing up as a woman who's about to go on maternity leave, but I'm going to resist the built-in bias I have about this experience, whether or not you're going to come back, why we have to pay for you to go, XYZ, and instead remain curious, not just to the fact you're about to go on maternity leave, but what you want out of your career afterwards. Studies on parental bias show that people assume that not only women, but also men who take parental leave are going to be less ambitious when they return. But surely if you've got another mouth to feed, you're only going to be more ambitious, because, I mean, let's face it, things are pretty expensive in the UK right now and the rest of the world. So yeah, staying curious and avoiding stereotypes and judgments is really, really, really key. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on this last, fourth and final helpful habit, because it's a big one. Now, this is about focusing on the impact of your words and your actions over the intention. Most of us are operating from our intentions. I meant to be nice. I meant to be friendly. I meant to do well. But intentions, unfortunately, aren't worth very much. What people remember is the impact. And I always think of that Maya Angelou quote. I love Maya Angelou. So if you've been to my webinars before, I quote her a lot, her and Brene Brown. But Maya Angelou said that people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. So let's say you have been invited to speak during, International Women's Day, or during Black History Month, and you mean to share a really nice story, but the impact is that you make people feel like you have outdated views about this, or you don't care about this. They're not really going to care what the story was about. They're not really going to care what you said. They're just going to remember the fact that when you finished talking, they were cringing and feeling like, oh my God, I can't believe I work here. Oh my God, I can't believe they said that. So it's really important for you to focus on the impact of your words. And the best way to get better at ensuring your words land with the right impact, the impact of making people feel like you care, that their voices are being heard, and that they matter, is to practice. If you're at a really senior position where every word counts, then go to your middle management and say to them, hey, I prepared this script, or I prepared these talking points for this announcement, this address. What do you think? Or, I'm thinking of sharing this anecdote, this story. Can I just test it out on you? Because I really want people to feel like I'm engaged on this topic and I care about it. And I just want to see if you think that's going to land correctly. But yeah, a lot of times, again, coming back to my own experience facilitating workshops for, all sorts of teams, but especially in exec level groups, people will say, oh, this thing happened where someone asked me to speak about our policy on freezing eggs, or someone asked me to speak about our policy on working from home. And, I just wanted to be honest about it. So I said ABC, and then everyone got really, really upset. And I was like, yeah, because, you probably meant to, make people feel like, hey, here's an informed decision, but the wording that you chose, or the anecdote that you chose, or the energy, the emotion you're giving in that moment made people feel like a certain way, like, oh gosh, no, that didn't land quite rightly. And, and no one cares. No one cares if the intention was good. People care about the impact. People care about how it made them feel. So this is why it's so important to practice what you want to say, map out your talking points in advance, map out your script. Or, if you are someone who's incredibly self-aware, incredibly competent at communicating, and comfortable with being vulnerable, or maybe not comfortable with being vulnerable, but willing to speak from the heart. Just speak from the heart. I think honestly, it feels scary at first, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So sometimes you should just start with your intention, stand up in front of the room or, the Zoom, and say to your team, hey, everyone, listen, today I want to talk about Black History Month. I know that racism is an issue that's affecting Black people every day, including, people in this community, in our customers, in this office. I know that maybe I don't really have a lot to say about that experience because I'm white or I'm this or whatever. But I want you to know that this matters to me, this is important to me, and this is something that I really care about. And even though I don't have all the answers, I want to do better. So, sometimes just starting with the impact we want to make can be a really powerful way to ensure that that impact then aligns with our intentions. Most of us don't want to have this big gap between our intentions and our impact, right? Most of us want to wake up and say, I'm an inclusive leader and I'm going to do everything it takes to make sure all people in my team, neurodiverse, young, old, Black, white, feel good about working here. But then we start acting, during the day, doing things. And somehow those actions don't quite align with that message. In an ideal world, we just want that, right? We want to close that gap and make sure it's all hunky-dory. And the only way that you can ensure that everything is hunky-dory is by speaking from the heart, being vulnerable, being open and honest about the impact that you want to achieve, and then make sure that when you are receiving feedback from people, you're listening compassionately, you're not listening to offer solutions or get defensive, you're believing what they say, and you're curious. Wow, thank you so much for coming forward and letting me know that. What should I do differently next time? Okay, I'm going to try that. I'm holding me accountable to that. I'm going to put it into practice. I remember one of the first ever Fearless Futures workshops I ever did. I love Fearless Futures. If you have a chance to work with them, highly recommend it. And Hannah Naima McCloskey, who is the CEO, said that impact matters so much more than intent, because it doesn't matter if someone didn't mean to hit your dog with their car, because the dog's still dead, whether they meant it or not. And that really just stuck with me. And I thought, oof, okay. And the reason I'm resharing her anecdote is because it's the reminder to you that at the end of the day, impact is all that we have. Intentions are great as guide points, but as we interact with our team, as we show up in the workplace, as our performance and behavior is assessed, it's really the impact of what we did that will be measured, and it's the impact of what we did that people will remember. So yeah, these are the helpful habits. Feel free to screenshot these, bring them back into your team, put them in a sticky note on your desk. And I really, really hope that, these are things that you'll be able to not just challenge yourself to do, but bring back to your team. Okay. So when someone is listening in a way where they're interrupting or offering solutions, challenge them and just say, hey, I went to this really interesting webinar about inclusive habits, and they talked a lot about compassionate listening. Why don't we try some compassionate listening in this session? And when people say, oh, what is compassionate listening? You just say to them like, okay, compassionate listening is where we listen to make the other person feel seen and heard. That's it. So usually compassionate listening, doesn't involve follow-ups. It doesn't involve interruptions. It's very much just being in that audience and holding the speaker's emotions. Shall we practice that? Shall we give it a go? Okay, great. Let's give that a go. And similarly with empathy, when someone in your team says, oh, I don't know what I can say about this because that's not my lived experience, I don't know, I can't speak on that topic, you can just say, well, listen, I went to this really interesting webinar, and they talked about how empathy can be a really helpful habit, and how if you can't empathize exactly with that experience, maybe you can go back to other times in your life or other spaces in your life where you have felt excluded, or where you have felt unsupported, or where you have felt unsafe. And that can be a helpful way to try and, find that empathy. So, maybe you have some experiences from school, from childhood, where, you lacked courage, lacked confidence, or lacked support. How did that make you feel? Because maybe that's, what Muhammad is feeling right now. Maybe that's what Sophia's feeling right now. I know a lot of people in the questions talked about how they just can't get certain managers or certain bosses to really appreciate the inclusion issues affecting them. And you might have to challenge those people to go back into the memory banks, because once you get senior and once you get older, you become quite resilient to the experiences that young people in the workforce are facing. So challenge those older, more senior people to go back into their memories and say, hey, like, what was your first job? What was your first ever job? What was your first ever internship? What was your first thing in tech? What was your first role in the corporate world? And, were there times where you were a bit scared, or were there times where you couldn't speak up? What was that like for you? There's no single person in the world who hasn't had a painful experience or a painful moment. Impossible. So try and tap into that. Similarly with like curiosity, you can challenge people in your team and say, ooh, I'm sensing a lack of curiosity here, and I don't think that's very healthy. I say that sometimes when people on my team are like, oh no, let's not bother with that because we've already done that, or I don't think that's going to work. I'll just say, ooh, well, that's not very curious. Everyone wants to be curious. Curiosity is often linked to a lot of our corporate values. So just like bring that lingo in, bring that language in, and just kind of challenge people. You can even just say, ooh, can we just pause for a second? Sorry, everyone, I just want to pause. I just want to pause. I went to this really interesting webinar about inclusive habits, and one of the habits that they had was about curiosity, and how applying curiosity is a great way to like open up space to have different perspectives acknowledged. And curiosity is also a great way to make everyone feel like they can contribute, and everyone feel like they're safe to contribute. So can I just challenge us for the rest of this meeting or for the rest of this session to turn our curiosity up to level 10, level 100, whatever it is, and let's stay in that curious place. And just get people to really like build that into how they think and how they work, because curiosity is also not interrupting people and not cutting people off. Like, oh, let me hear what you have to say. Yeah, great, I'm really curious about that. And then finally, get into the habit of telling people that impact matters more than intent. Oh, but that's not what I meant. I know that's not what you meant, but what you intended to do is not as important as the impact of what you did. Okay. And I have this little sticky note on my laptop screen back home, which is like impact and then like the greater than arrow symbol, intent. And that might be something you want to write on a whiteboard next time you bring your team together, or next time you're sitting down with your execs, or the next time you have any sort of collaborative session. Just write impact greater than intent and say to everyone, okay, this is a starting point for this discussion. This is the starting point for this session. The impact of what we do will always be greater than the intention. And from that, what should we do about X? What should we do about Y? And if you can build that into your day-to-day conversations, if you can use that as a challenging point for your managers, for your team, I really, really believe that you can start to make positive change. So yeah, final call for questions or chat, because we're going to be wrapping up in a minute or so. I just wanted to let everyone know that if you want to bring these conversations into your team, you can come to us. We would love to facilitate workshops for you. I know budgets are tight, so if you are looking for a budget-friendly inclusion training, highly recommend that you check out hustlecrew.co/academy. You can start a free trial. You and your team can do this training and get certified on LinkedIn to show that you have completed our inclusion skills training. But of course, we would love to come in and facilitate this live and really create space for you, your leaders, and your team to have these brave conversations about what inclusive impact looks like. And also really like which of these habits are more doable than others, because I know it's all good and well to sit here in the moment and say, yeah, I'm going to be curious, I'm going to listen with compassion, and I'm going to focus on impact over intent. But then we have to go back to work and get things done in time for the deadline, and squeeze 50 hours of work into an 8-hour day. So it's certainly not easy. But I genuinely believe that if you can just normalize these words and say, I'm holding myself accountable to them, and then use these words, use these phrases as ways to challenge your team and model behavior for your team. Hey, I really like that question. What would that question look like if you applied a little more curiosity? Little things like that. Or like, oh, I really appreciate that. Can I just ask, next time, if you were going to listen with more compassion, what might you do differently? Bring these conversations into the fold. But yeah, I will end on that note. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties as well. I really appreciate it. If there's anything I didn't actually cover, you can email abadesi@hustlecrew.co. I'll do my best to get back to you in the next few days. Have a good one. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.